Andy Edwards. Never heard of him.
Hello and welcome to this video. On this video I'm going to go through what I think are the 10 greatest albums from the 1980s, the decade that begins in 1980 and finishes in the end of 1989. Now, I've approached this subject before many a time. I've put stuff forth, and then since then you learn of other great albums, and then you add that to the list. You think, I need to do the list again maybe, and it gets to that point where you need to revisit it, and I definitely need to revisit it. But more recently what's been interesting is I am now using AI to help me create these lists. So just to explain my new process of making these lists, what I tend to do is I will come up with a list of albums off my own back. So I'm not using AI for this. I will based upon what I know, based upon what other people have messaged me about, if you checked out this album, this band, I will then come up with around about 30, 40 albums. Then I will ask AI if there is anything I may have forgotten, but just basically to go through these and rank them in terms of 3 parameters. And I do a very similar thing myself. So I'm working with AI, I'm referring to it, but I am altering it when I don't think it's quite right. The 3 parameters I'm looking at would be how much it sold, how popular it was, how much the general public loved it, its acclaim critically, you know, how it's ranked across the whole of the internet. And that's one thing with AI you can now do. I think that's the important bit. See how many, you know, which of these have got the most 5-star reviews across the whole of the internet? AI comes back telling you that. And also innovation, which I think is the X factor that then starts to sort the men out from the boys or women out from the girls in terms of this list. And so putting all that in and then refining it, taking out albums I think that were there erroneously or I've got my own opinion about. So my opinion's in there. But I think doing this over the past couple of weeks, I've come up with a pretty definitive greatest albums of the 1980s. I think I've really nailed this one. It's really, really good. Now, the thing is, once it was done, I let the AI rank it in terms of those criteria. And when I say I let it do it, I asked it to do it. And when I saw the order, I went, you know, that is so much more wilder and so much more controversial than what I would have put. But I think the AI is right. So this is a very controversial list. The number one, you're going to be surprised at when I get there. But everyone I've told this to and said this is what came up with number one have sort of gone, really? I suppose so. Everyone's done that. So this is a pretty... this is going to be a good little list, you know, and it's going to get some conversations going. Of course, all this has a subjective aspect to it, of course, you know, and we'll all have our own favourites, you know, and I can't know possibly everything about music, obviously, so, you know, it is what it is, and I'm being quite honest here, because this video is not going to have that much humour in it. It's a pretty serious list as far as I'm concerned, so you're going to be getting the real 10 greatest albums of the 1980s according to me, Andy Edwards. That's what you're going to get. So, shall we get straight in? At number 10, I have got on the list, and this was something that I put in, and this is probably something that most people would kick out. I have got David Sylvian's Gone to Earth that came out in 1986. David Sylvian, of course, was the singer with Japan. Japan, I think, were the most sort of artistic and experimental of that group of pop bands that emerges in the early 80s in the United Kingdom, using electronics, you know, coming out of art rock like Roxy Music and David Bowie, and streamlining that down to something that was very high art, very un-rock and roll in a way, very experimental, but was also you know, getting in the top of the charts. When I did my greatest songs ever made, Ghosts by Japan made that list. I think it's an incredible song, made more miraculous that it was actually a big hit single. I felt that with Japan, they only got better. And I originally wanted to put Tin Drum in. But my feelings are, God, I've got a lot of, so just, it's putting me off. This is, mute you and mute you. I do apologise for the, you know, digital disruptions coming in. Sometimes you have to disconnect. To be on the internet like that, you need to disconnect. I've just done that. Right, so where were we? So I felt that once Sylvie had left Japan, although, you know, the chart hits weren't there, and although the cultural impact wasn't there, his album Brilliant Trees and then the follow-up to that, Gone to Earth, was mind-blowing. And for me, now, Gone to Earth comes in 2 discs. The first disc is a selection of songs which carry on from the sort of experimentation of Japan, but the sound is a lot more organic. On this album, we see David Sylvian alongside, I think it's Kenny Wheeler on trumpet. We've got Robert Fripp on guitar. We've got Steve Jansen on drums. It's an incredible lineup. It is like an extension of Japan. The second disc is a collection of ambient music. I haven't got that much ambient music in my collection. It doesn't interest me that much. I don't want all that ambient stuff that Eno does. But this ambient stuff is great. And I like the idea of seeing this almost like a single album with this additional ambient thing stuck on the side of it. Now, as far as I'm concerned, one of the criteria that I wanted to put in through all of this was anything tainted with the 80s production styles and techniques, which have never come back into fashion, I'm afraid has to get kicked out. And so what we've got here are 10 albums, I hope, that if you put them on, no one's going to be saying, oh, this sounds horrible. No, the song's great. And, you know, I just wish that drum sound was a little bit more organic. And I wish it didn't have those DX7s and orchestral sample hits all over it. This list deals with the innovations in production that happened in the 1980s. It deals with it in depth, but it also tries to present a whole bunch of albums that sound listenable today. So that's what I've got at number 10 is David Sylvian's Gone to Earth. I've got my notes here. In terms of innovation, it's extremely high. There's like a lot of weird time signatures. It's quite technical. It's very precise in the playing. Steve Jansen's drumming is pretty, you know, awe-inspiring, to be honest. It didn't sell that well, which drops it back down. In terms of acclaim, I think those in the know will say Gone to Earth's a masterpiece, but you have to be in the know to know it. It's a very beautiful album. But it gets marked right down, even though I would say that it's more perfect in a way than some of the other albums on this list. It gets marked down for not having the cultural reach of the other albums on here, all of which from now on sold reasonably well. So at number 9, and this is where we set the bar in terms of the genius of these albums. At number 9 from 1981, I've got Moving Pictures from Rush. How much have I spoken about this album? Again, an absolutely perfect album. Rush, in that process, starting with Permanent Waves, where they started to move away from the sword and sorcery and started to embrace a way of making progressive rock, technical rock, but in a way that suited the 1980s. Most progressive rock bands weren't able to make that transition, or if they did, they just became out-and-out pop bands. I believe by Grace Under Pressure, Rush hadn't quite become an out-and-out pop band, but the things that made Rush Rush, which in the end was a sort of nerdy sublimeness. This is great art for nerds, and it is great art. And I think the fact that Rush was sort of looked down upon for the vast, you know, majority of the time period they were going, and then now have suddenly turned around into being sort of the elder statesman of rock and celebrated everywhere. It was not the case. And I think it's down to a whole host of things, but never can I, you know, in a band that's made so many brilliant records as well, I can't think of a band that just nailed it. Even they admit this, that they just nailed it with Moving Pictures. Every track on Moving Pictures is absolutely Rush at their peak. It does everything that Rush does. There is even Witch Hunt, which goes into that sort of old medieval witch hunt and sort of type of thing. There's no sword and sorcery as such, but we do then have Red Barchetta, which is just dystopian futures and all that. So they do go there on this album. It's a progressive rock album through and through. I just love this. If it was my personal ranking, this could easily be number one, I think, as the greatest album from the 1980s. But as I said, this is a real attempt of objectivity, and we've used the AI to get, you know, get an input from all over the world, which is what we can all now do with this. And so it's the reason why AI has knocked this down. He says it's not universally worshipped. In other words, it's not on everybody's list. Why? Because of the prejudice against prog, because of the prejudice against Rush, because of those music critics that want to seem like they're clever. And there's a couple of ones on here that I know when I say them, people will go, oh yes, Andy's got it smack on right. There's a couple of critics' favourites here. Rush is not that. Okay. At number 8, originally, I had Sign of the Times by Prince, which is an unbelievably great album. It's a brilliant album. When you start to get out there and start to include like sales and, you know, 5-star rankings, if you go to Rolling Stone's greatest albums, that list, that's going to come up with, you know, the highest Prince album on that will be Purple Rain. Purple Rain is a very iconic album. For me, it is marred by too much 80s production. Prince had to move away from that. He was almost an innovator in that, and then he moved away from that after Purple Rain. And that, for me, is when Prince starts to get interesting. Now, Sign of the Times is a brilliant album, but I do feel, and we're talking about brilliant albums here, I do feel there are just too many funky jams going on. And I love funky jams. An album of funky Prince jams is like heaven to me. But in terms of artistic statements, I feel it, because it being a double album, it sags. Most great double albums sag. There's very few absolutely brilliant double albums from start to finish. I think I would be putting in Songs in the Key of Life, perhaps, or All Things Must Pass by George Harrison. Sign of the Times is pretty close, but for me, the album that won me over, that I think he's just hit so hard from beginning to end, where the 80s production sounds incredible and Prince's songwriting is at an absolute peak, is Parade, which came out in 1986. It's still got that minimalist funk thing going, but it also has an orchestral sound to it, because obviously this was the album to this sort of bomb, which was Under a Cherry Moon, the black and white sort of film he made as a follow-up to Purple Rain that didn't really hit the nail. But this album's incredible. Now, in terms of sales, Prince at this moment in time was absolutely at the top of his game. If we compare the sales of Parade to Purple Rain, it's nowhere near. But this still was a very successful album. It spawned 2 incredible singles, Girls and Boys and Kiss. And I think in terms of what Prince does, Kiss could well be the definitive track. AI scanning across the internet told me that there's a lot of musicians that love this album. Now, I have no problem with that. I'm a musician. A lot of people who watch this are musicians. It could well be Prince's musician album. I can remember what won me over to Prince on this album was the single Girls and Boys. When that appeared, I suddenly stood up and took note. I knew he was a great artist. I thought he was a great pop artist. But listening to the way that was arranged and orchestrated, and there's a use of a baritone sax, which just pops at a certain point in that song. But that next to these sort of finger cymbals that are just chiming, I thought, this guy's bloody brilliant. This is genius. So I think Parade is a pretty faultless album on every single level. That's at number 8. At number 7, originally we had The Hounds of Love by Kate Bush. Now, that's a great album. Side 1 packed with hit records. Side 2, this great long sort of proggy, very English, very dark tale of witches and people lost at sea, and I absolutely love it. But I think The Hounds of Love is unbelievable. But the Dreaming that came out in 1982 is even more incredible. I think as time has passed, everyone knows that that is perhaps Kate's finest hour. And it's so fine. She struck out so far into the future that at the time people just couldn't carry, they couldn't keep up. And I think at the time as well, if you look at the year this came out, 1982, so when she was making this album, she was around about 20, 21 years old. And I think there's some ageism and sexism at the time of, could someone this age really be creating something such a masterpiece, or is it just weird? And I think a lot of people thought this was weird at the time. In terms of the use of Fairlight, the Fairlight sampling computer system, it's groundbreaking. The way she takes her voices into another level, so rather than singing in the voice of Kate Bush, which every other pop star does, she creates it almost like a vocal theatre of all sorts of different characters playing all sorts of different parts. That is incredible. We could say it's innovative, but how many other people have done that? The sales weren't great for Kate Bush. She was a huge seller in the 70s. She went on to become a huge seller, and she's a huge seller now. But I think sales can only play a certain part in this ranking. So for me, I think this is her greatest album. It's flawless from beginning to end. It's one of my favourite albums. What drops it down a little bit, it's a little bit niche. It's not all encompassing. We have some coming up in a minute that are all encompassing in their power, to do whatever it is that they do. At number 6, I've got an album that I've known about for 40 years. I remember it coming out. I remember the critics loved it. I listened to it at the time. I thought it was really good, but it passed me by. I've since gone back to it, and I can see it's an absolute masterpiece. This is Walk Across the Rooftops, that came out in 1984 by the Blue Nile. Now, what I love about this is the 80s aesthetic in terms of production writ large. But coming back to it 40 years later, this sounds as fresh as a daisy. It's incredible. It's groovy, it's funky, it's dark and minimal. The sales, of course, for this were low at the time. This is an album that got into the status it now has by being purely brilliant. This is a small Scottish band. They bring it out on a little label. It starts to go. People listen to it. And it's not just that people are going, oh, I quite like this album. People are buying it and then going, oh my God, this is now my favourite album of all time, telling everybody else. And so it's grown organically. What's so great about it is the songs are very strong. The subject content is very strong. The way the band interacts with technology is really, really interesting. It really looks to the way songs are made now, but it never falls into the production, ugliness that we now hear as being a bit tasteless. Why? Because I think there was a strand within indie music at the time, coming through bands like Cabaret Voltaire, maybe The Art of Noise, which was exploring technology in a much more interesting way. And I think the Blue Nile had that and the songs, and all that creates an incredible album. It's not my thing. It's not sort of stuff I normally listen to, but I recognise that this has been absolutely sublime, and that makes me have a more objective viewpoint on this, if that makes sense. Right, so that's what I got. Number 6 is the Blue Nile, Walk Across the Rooftops. At number 5, coming out in 1988, we have Talk Talk, Spirit of Eden. Right, coming off the back of the previous album that had sold 2 million copies, Mark Hollis decides to go back into the studio and really explore that sort of photographic 1950s woody English aesthetic sound that was always in Talk Talk, and kick out anything that sounded like it belonged past, say, 1965. He went back to the blues, he went back to the jazz of that time, free jazz, and also the sort of like a beatnik style jazz, but he also goes back to folk music. And Spirit of Eden is so un-1980s. Came out in 1988, which for me is almost like the worst period in terms of 80s production, 80s cheesiness. You know, the charts are full of Kylie Minogue and Jason Donovan and all that type of thing. This really brings in the idea of post-rock. When you follow the albums on, the follow-up Laughing Stock and then his final masterpiece, Mark Hollis, he goes towards something which is almost like anti-rock. It's about absolute crystal clear quietness, up closeness, breathiness. There's no aspect of visceral rock and roll in there whatsoever. It's in here and it explodes out of it. And I think that's why Spirit of Eden still remains the absolute masterpiece of Mark Hollis and Talk Talk. The sales were pretty low for it, which drops it down. But I think so many people that I meet, you know, when you mention this album and they just go all gooey-eyed, we really are talking about one of the greatest albums ever made. So that's what I got at number 5. In the past, this album, which I've got at number 4, I have said is the greatest album from the 1980s. I think in terms of influence, innovation, it is without doubt the greatest album on this list. It is the Brian Eno and David Byrne album, My Life in a Bush of Ghosts, which came out in 1981, created in 1980. In terms of innovation, like I said, it marks the difference between what people are going to do that's great in the 1970s and what people are going to do that's great in the 1980s. So often when I'm trying to make my own music and I move away from the standard song format and I'm looking for a solution of how to make this feel it has the weight of the song and is not just, you know, some random bit of background music, to give it the weight. So often the solution comes from this album, whether it's a certain type of voiceover or whether it's a certain loop or whether it's a conjunction of different styles of music. It really brings in this sort of idea of the global rhythm collage, you know, that you can switch on a shortwave radio and just start collect sounds from absolutely anywhere and everywhere. It's a very early example of sampling at a high level. Of course, the sales were extremely low. But the innovation is off the charts, and I thought it's got to come up. I brought it up a little bit. And why have I put it at number 4? Because people who haven't heard that album need to go and hear it. Right? If you're interested in music, seriously, and you want to know what the 1980s is about, right, and you want to know the link between electronic music, hip-hop, indie music, jazz, it's all here on this album. Okay, so that's what I've got. Number 4 is My Life in a Bush of Ghosts by Brian Eno and David Byrne. Right, at number 3, I have the Beastie Boys with their 1989 album, Paul's Boutique. This is a really difficult one because the innovation on this, it almost like whatever Brian Eno and David Byrne set up in the beginning of the 1980s, at the end of the 1980s, it's wrapped up by the Beastie Boys and presented like this. Now, of course, you know, when it came out, the sales weren't that great. Why? Well, the big music form of the 1980s is rap. I knew I had to have a rap album on this list. Originally, I put in, which I've done before, Public Enemy's, you know, It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back. Really obvious choice. And this is where rap grows up and becomes serious, and it's not just a sort of novelty music form. And it's an incredibly innovative album. It sold well. Public Enemy had a massive cultural impact. So that seems to make sense. In 1986, when Def Jam was kicking off, Beastie Boys emerged, and they were like white trash kids being offensive on that first album. Now, that first album is brilliant, but they were perceived in a certain way. When they went back into the studio and hooked up with the Dust Brothers, which are probably the most important producers in the world at that time, and come up with this is the greatest rap album ever made. Now, I don't want to say that because obviously there's all sorts of reasons, you know, cultural reasons, racial reasons. Why? That's not the case. But what's better than this? I mean, go and put it on and listen to it. It like pummels you in the face. It's incredible. It's one of the funkiest albums ever made. The use of sampling is just like, it's never been bettered. Even now, no one's ever done better than this. Why? Because no one had a clue about sampling back then. Right? They got clearance of these samples for next to nothing. So it's got all the best music. It's like going, it's 1989. Do you want to know the best of all the 20th century music? Well, here it is in one big plop. The Beastie Boys as a rap team. Well, they might not be a Tribe Called Quest. They're not Q-Tip. Although Q-Tip's going to be working with them by Ill Communication. This album, Check Your Head, Ill Communication, they're all unbelievable. Ill Communication, I believe, tops this. And that could well be the greatest album of the 1990s. But this is unbelievable, isn't it? Paul's Boutique. If you haven't heard it, it's incredible. A sample delirium masterpiece. That's what I've written down here. Moderate sales at the release, but huge legacy. It's now considered top tiered because of including all the albums of this time. And it's just one of my favourite albums. That's it. Right, when I'm talking about it, this is the one I want to grab and put in the car, and it'll stay in the car for 2 weeks. Amazing album. So what have I got at number 2? Well, could have had Thriller here. Thriller's a very influential album, although I think Michael Jackson did his innovations on Off the Wall. But the use of sort of 80s production, the minimalism that's on Thriller. But I have to be honest, I said to my friend Rob when we were driving to the gig, I said, can you put Thriller on? And we put it on. Wanna Be Starting Something is incredible on side 1. Side 1 finishes with Thriller. They're great, but the 2 tracks in between, they're good. It's not bad, they're good. Flip it over, same thing happens again. You know, you've Billie Jean, great. Human Nature is good. PYT, it's all right. You know, these are tracks that reside on the biggest selling album of all time. Right. So I decided to not go there, and I decided to go to a massive selling album that is musically incredibly innovative and is sublime in terms of the songwriting. And this might seem like a weird choice to some, but I came up with the Joshua Tree. Now, I wouldn't have ranked it at number 2, but according to AI, when you put it in, right, those atmospherics that we saw at the beginning of this video on Gone to Earth, that sort of enosification of music is going on to the U2 sound on here. So that Lanois Eno production is incredible, and the Edge's guitar vocabulary here is totally committed to that. Now, these songs have become such a part of our culture that when we listen to something like With or Without You, which I believe is one of the greatest songs ever written, the way that it's executed is so minimal, it's so powerful, it's so avant-garde in a way, but we don't notice it because the songwriting is so unbelievably incredible and very simple as well. Bono's voice is one of the greatest voices in rock. Larry Mullen's drumming is absolutely sublime. He's an incredible drummer. The Joshua Tree is perhaps the biggest selling, most popular arty album of all time, and I think it's just, I mean, I'm not a fan of U2. I've got no U2 albums at all. I champion them and I like them. I've got this album though, right, and I've still got it. I haven't let go of it, because if I put it on all the way through, it's just brilliant music. That's who I've got number 2, U2. So what's at number 1? Well, I could hear you shouting, you've missed out rock and metal, you missed out all the thrash bands, you know, and now at number 1, you're not going to put a thrash metal album at number 1. You believe it, I am. The greatest album of the 1980s, and I'm pretty convinced this is true, is Master of Puppets from 1986 by Metallica. Innovation is huge. This basically picks metal up and places it in another place. And it's never going to sound the same again. If you play metal that sounds like Master of Puppets, no one even calls it metal anymore. What we called metal in 1981-82 is no longer called metal. This almost invents metal. This, following on from the Iron Maiden albums, and I think The reason why we haven't got Number Beast on here is we are talking about absolute genius. Number the Beast is almost flawless, but Master of Puppets, there is nowhere on that album where you go, oh, it's starting to sag now. It's like a brick wall of genius. They just never, the intensity of this band at the time, their commitment to what they're doing, and then the way it's produced is unbelievable. This is thrash metal's apex, right? This is where the sound of heavy metal is birthed, basically. It's like you can't turn back from this point. The sales, incredible, huge, multi-platinum. It's sold since then forever. Right, it's universally top ranked. People who don't like metal, who have heard this album, will go, yeah, well, that is a brilliant album, like myself, right? If you were to score it in the 3 criteria, and this is what AI said when I questioned it, it said, if you're scoring it in the way you were saying in terms of sales, innovation, and acclaim, and 5-star reviews from both the critics and the public alike, when you add all of that up, the biggest album on that score of the 1980s is Master of Puppets by Metallica. I throw it out there into the cultural discourse. Is that the greatest album of the 1980s? It is, isn't it? It absolutely is. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, stick a like on it. If you want to see some more, you can put a subscribe on it. Please subscribe, because I know people aren't subscribing and all that type of thing. So, you know, make sure you subscribe. Check, sometimes they kick you out as well. I've got a Patreon. You can become a member there. There's so much content there. You'll never get to the back end of it, believe me. And it means I have a contact there and I could chat to you guys that are on Patreon. I haven't been on it so much for the last couple of weeks, and I apologise to the patrons. I will be there soon, though. Don't worry. Working on it today. Or you can become a member here. I'm about to do some member and patron videos, because I'm about to do some of my hate videos. You know those types of videos where I go through all these artists I absolutely hate and say ridiculous things about them. Now, we know there's a kernel of truth in what I'm saying, but they are also humorous. So when I do one of those, I've decided to back it up with my real opinion, but that will only be for members. So if you want to hear that, they'll be coming up in the next week. I've got a couple of 8 videos coming up that the mainstream will enjoy. So go and check that out. Anyway, I'm at the end of the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.